Hi, everybody. I want to invite Zach, Zarin, Sashka, and Lucia to switch on the cameras. Hi, so nice to see you all. Dear parents, thank you so much for joining us. Before I hand over to the leaders of this conversation, I want to explain a little bit about why we decided that this dialogue is important. And it will be really a conversation between, I will try to give as much floor as possible to our alums. I think that their perspective will be very interesting for you as parents, because I think that they can share their personal stories and the experience. And as we always say, once like the 2 years of UWC Dilijan, I think probably have in a way or in many ways have changed their lives. And have given them some very valuable lessons. And I think that also it's very significant that they all come from different generations. You can see in their year numbers. So Lucia is our first generation, graduating in 2016, followed then Sashka, next generation, and Zarin graduated recently. Zach graduated in the midst of pandemic, just ending. So but I think you will probably hear a lot of similarities in things that they will be sharing. As Gabriel mentioned, and as Madhu also mentioned, the UWC values are a core foundation of UWC experience. And this is something that we share with all UWC schools and UWC movement as well. And also UWC values are part of the selection criteria, how we select our students. And as Gabriel mentioned in talking about the average grade, we don't select our students based on grade, we select them based on their personal qualities. And they're clearly outlined in our 5 core selection criteria. UWC has 9 values, 9 core values, but I think that today we want to focus our first dialogue about personal responsibility and integrity and mutual responsibility and integrity. As you all know, in UWC and UWC Dilijan in particular, we try to bring together, we bring together young people from different walks of life, from very different countries, different backgrounds, and we select them based on their personal qualities that they kind of all share. And there is one thing that I always tell students who are applying, and I always tell parents whose children are applying, that the most important probably selection criteria is personal motivation to be a part of this community. And I think that that's what really stands out when a person visits UWC Dilijan, is that how everybody who is there, and you probably remember that, how everybody really wants to be there, and how everything that's happening on campus is driven by students' initiative, by students' eagerness, by students' desire, and our role as adults, like teachers and as part of the administration and everybody around these young people, very motivated young people, is to support and to empower them and to give them feedback and to support them. And I think a very good example of this are the project weeks that are always led by the students and supported by the staff, or the CAST projects, where always the lead is taken by the students. And I think that because students are the center of UWC education in and outside of the classroom, it's very important that the young people who are UWCDers have enough of maturity, personal responsibility, and mutual respect to create a community that is comfortable not just for them, but also for their peers and people around them. And also that they take the most out of this opportunity of sharing space with so many inspiring young people and a little bit older people as well. And I think that I want to invite, first of all, maybe starting in the order of the youngest one, starting with Zarin and then followed by Zach, Sashka, and Lucia, to share a little bit where you are today. What are you doing? Which year you graduated, and where you're from as well. And then I will start with my first question to you. But I also want to add from my personal experience, just to tell you, like I think Lucia knows my first day of in UWC Dilijan campus, and I think that the most important impression that I had on this first day was how amazing the students were, how they were vocal and outspoken, and I remember visiting the first day I attended the community meeting was driven by the students fully, and that feeling of seeing the youth in its full power gives you a hope for a better future. And I don't want to sound too idealistic because the times are difficult, but it still does give a hope. And I think that's why people who have been connected to UWC Diligent and have encountered UWC Diligent really try to stay in touch with it. Like myself, I'm not anymore on campus, but there is something very special about this place that brings together so much young energy, so much positive young energy, and you feel that you are part of something very meaningful. So over to Zareen.
Hi everyone, my name is Zareen. I am from Dhaka, Bangladesh. I'm the most recent graduate here, so I graduated last year in 2022. I'm currently at the University of Chicago, and I'm pursuing a double major in either economics and math or economics and public policy. So the plan is to perhaps go into economic research or academia in the future.
Hello, everyone. I'm Zach. I'm from the Philippines. I graduated not too long before Zarin, just 2 years ago, like Elena mentioned at the height of the pandemic. Currently, I'm an undergraduate student at Sciences Po in France. I'm studying politics and government, ideally with the hope of pursuing law school after this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sashka from Georgia. I graduated a little longer ago than the previous panelists. It was in 2017. After that, I went on to do bachelor's in neuroscience, and currently I'm looking into continuing my studies in the direction of biomedicine and clinical research. And yeah, that's it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lucia. I'm from Spain. And yeah, I was part of the first generation of students to graduate from UWC Diligent. I graduated in 2016. Afterwards, I went to university in London, where I still am living now. I studied anthropology. Afterwards, I did a master's in documentary film. And now I recently joined Amnesty International, where I work as a video producer for the Eastern Europe and Central Asia office.
Thank you guys for introducing yourselves. It's very nice to hear what you're doing, and I wish you all the best with all the interesting things that you're doing and the studies. And okay, so my first question I would like, and so maybe we will establish like parents, please, you're welcome to write questions that our wonderful ones will be answering. And I think it's also like a UWC experience is sometimes it's better seen from the balcony. You know, it's like you can really like a distance, it's like a masterpiece in a museum, like more away you are, better you see the main highlights. And I wanted to ask you, like these values that I mentioned, personal responsibility and integrity and mutual responsibility and integrity, what do they mean to you? Like this is a question that I often ask students who are applying. And so as people who graduated, what do they mean to you? And if you raise your hand, I'll invite everybody to answer. So who wants to go first? Lucia, you have your mic? Or Zach? Yeah, Zach, go.
Yeah, so I mean, just to start the conversation off, I think ironically, the words personal responsibility, you would think that it's mainly about taking charge of yourself, but something that I learned 2 years after the entire experience in UWC is that more than anything, I think given how contagious the energy is on campus, everyone is living together. And when one thing happens to someone, more or less everyone will be dealing with the same circumstances. And so personal responsibility to me at least always meant trying as much as possible to take into consideration how other people will be impacted by whatever you do. Knowing that you're part of this community, on the one hand, you get to know a lot more about yourself as an individual because you get to see what's different from you and what resonates with you. But at the same time, you need to recognize that for those 2 years living in that community, you become very much a part of it, for better or for worse. And so you taking charge of yourself is as much about being respectful of other people as much as it is taking care of yourself for those 3 years.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, Sashka, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add that I completely agree. And to that end, I think that one important aspect too, in terms of personal responsibility, was that yeah, obviously it's about like mutual respect and like being a good member of this like bigger community, but it's also about taking care of yourself too, in a way that it's 2 years, it's not that short, as short as it seems in a bigger picture, and for you to make sure that you are not allowing yourself to like burn out, and that as much as you are there for others, you are there for yourself as well, and that you are informed enough on the various ways that the school is there to support you, and that you're using those tools basically. Yeah, I think that's quite important.
Thank you. I think Zarin, yes, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think right before I traveled to Armenia, even from before then, the word integrity was quite important to me because my dad would keep saying that to me because I'm an only child and I was heavily reliant on my parents before I went to UWC Dilijan. Like it was a big step and a big transition for me. So he would keep telling me that always remember your culture and the values you come from because I am from South Asia, so from a rather conservative community. And I knew that going into Armenia with people from over 80 or 90 different countries of the world, I'd be exposed to so many different and new cultures. And I couldn't forget my roots and the values that I come from. With that being said, at the same time, I knew that I had to be open to new experiences and I should challenge myself. So I think that's why the value of personal responsibility and integrity always resonated with me. And when I looked at that, when I knew that that was a UWC value, I think that was also an incentive for me to apply. And also, I think I completely agree with Zach that once I came here, I realized that personal responsibility is very intricately connected with mutual responsibility and showing respect for the community as well. And I think for my year, that looked a little bit different because we when we arrived in Armenia for the first time, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and we couldn't and our campus was on lockdown for the first 1.5 years. So we had to find different ways of finding meaning and of connecting with the community. And I think that was very interesting. But at the same time, it also almost gave birth to this desire within ourselves, knowing that we had so much potential to do so much and to connect in so many ways with the Dilijan community, but maybe all of those different ways was hindered. And that's why it was always a responsibility to have an impact on whichever community we were in, but perhaps the responsibility was almost amplified because we were almost hindered in our capabilities for the first 1.5 years.
Yes, Lucia.
So yeah, I think I would like to talk about personal responsibility also from the perspective of learning and education. I think every like generation at UWC Dilijan, I think there's always a lot of conversations about what is education? Is it academic? Is it beyond that? Should you focus on one or the other? And but I think those conversations were definitely very prominent in the first years because we had this like big pressure to define what the school was going to be, even though the school gets redefined over and over. And I remember like talking to people for hours, like, are academics important? Is it important to get into a good university? Do we even need to go to university? What kind of jobs are meaningful, etc. And I remember asking me and other people, we asked the teacher that had also taught at like other UWCs and had lots of experience. And what he said really stuck with me, which is that UWC Dilijan and UWC schools are meant to be a place where you can get the education that you want. So if you're someone that really wants to focus on academics and then get into like a very prestigious university, the school should give you the resources. If you really want to focus on engaging with a community, the school should give you the resources. And I thought that answer was unsatisfactory because it didn't give me like, you know, a right or wrong kind of way of judging my approach to my education. But I think in UWC, you're also taught to take personal responsibility, to identify what matters to you and to pursue that. So, you know, there's a million ways to go about your life, what you do after UWC, etc. But you need to make sure you know what matters to you and you use those resources.
Thank you, Lucia. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your personal insights. And also, like, I think it will be interesting, like what you, Lucia, shared, for us to hear your stories as well. from the academic and the residential and in between and everything, because I think that it can also translate the UWC values more into the real examples. We do probably all understand what it means, but when you're part of a community of 80 nationalities, and like Zareen said, with so many different cultural traditions that you come into a one melting pot, is it, and also you're teenagers, a lot of stuff is going on, and yet you're super motivated to learn, and the intellectual curiosity is an innate part of you. I have been always curious to understand this intellectual intrinsic motivation to learn that you bring into UWC Dilijan. I think that it makes, and this conversation that Lucia, you mentioned about what is important, and they're driven by the students, that also like speaks a lot about what kind of community we have. And I wanted to ask you to share a little bit more of personal examples of coexistence in the room, of coexistence in the classroom, of how this diversity becomes actually strength and not the weakness. So whoever wants to go ahead and start. Am I making you all nostalgic? Sashka, do you remember your room? I remember your room. I remember your roommates.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of a more nostalgic time, I would say. Yeah, I had a very interesting room. We were like 4 students that, it was like a perfect UWC room of like 4 students from completely different backgrounds, completely different aspirations. I would say personality-wise, we also differed a lot. And I think what worked for us too was that through having many challenges, some of them very trivial and easy, as in like one of my roommates would have an alarm on at 7 or 6 a.m. and I was much more of a late morning sleeper, put it this way. So like working through those tiny problems sort of gave us a foundation to then realize that if we have enough trust to face some clear issues together, that would work. But I also need to acknowledge that sometimes those problems would be more than we would be capable of solving ourselves. And I think in those cases, what I want to highlight is that we had a lot of support from other sort of structures at school, such as peer listeners, tune parents. And I think it was something that we did in my room. It was when it was as much as we could, we would try to deal with things on our own, but when it became necessary, we would be honest with each other and involve the relevant structures, etc., whatever, what have you, that was necessary at the time to deal with things. Because sometimes, as much as you might enjoy living with each other, when you're having a bad time, you might be toxic to yourself, you might become toxic to others, and just acknowledging it and just talking about it is just not sufficient. So it's important to just keep that team spirit and then like act on things when they're there. So I don't know if I was too vague, but I hope it gives information.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, yes, Zareen, go ahead.
I think when we speak of cultural diversity and benefiting from it, we have to talk about the regional evenings that we organize and how special they are. Like I think each regional evening still holds a special place in my heart. It was so fun to not just observe and not just watch all of people from all of these different countries pull out their traditional dances and their traditional songs. But I think what was so special is that you could also participate in them. So I think never in the world, never in time would I ever again get the opportunity to do a Palestinian dabke or something like that, or have friends from over 5 countries of the world do the Bangladeshi traditional dance. So I think those are very special and cherished memories. And I think another memory that I wanted to talk about is that earlier last year, when the Russia and the Ukraine war broke off, immediately, merely a few hours, our Russian and Ukrainian students, they called a town hall meeting in the atrium, and we were all there. We were all supporting them, and I think it was such a rare sight to see Russians and Ukrainians coming together and talking about this very unfortunate thing that it just happened in the world, and talking about potential solutions as to what could solve the war or as to what could solve the conflict. And I think that was a very special that was a very special memory as well for me because I felt like that was something that could only happen in a UWC. And that was very important because I think that's something that I will remember for the rest of my life because it's very intrinsically connected to the value of showing mutual responsibility and respect not only towards cultures but also towards others' feelings. And in relation to that, another issue is that I think sometimes it's true because if you don't see your friends suffering, then it's really actually difficult to capture the sentiment or understand what's going on. But the fact that we were able to be with our Armenian friends when the war with Azerbaijan broke out for the first time in October of 2020, the fact that we saw our Ukrainian Russian friends suffer earlier last year, that really amplified all of these sentiments and I think gave us a much better understanding of what was going on in the world, which would have never been possible if we weren't part of the UWC community.
Thank you, Zareen. So I want to share with you some findings that so my colleague Mane, she did, I think last year, a questionnaire. We did a questionnaire with the staff, with the academic and residential staff, which sometimes, they have both positions. And we asked them to rank different qualities, what they value in a student from what makes a good student. So we were trying to understand what is the profile of the UWC Dirijan student that we all agree on. And it was very actually rewarding to see. So we put some tricky questions. And I want to tell you what were the characteristics that ranked the lowest. I want to start first with the lowest. So number one, lowest characteristic was doesn't question the rules. This came from the teachers and residential staff, which we were very happy to see because this shows like that how much we believe in our students, and how much we want them to be critical thinkers. Then the second lowest has good written communication skills in English. The third lowest has good oral communication skills in English. These are the things that it's not that we don't value discipline and organization, but we know that person can learn English. And the things that were scored as number one, number two, number three. Number one is mindful and respectful of others' points of view. Number two was actually very close to it, is reflective of their own behavior and actions, is able to cooperate. And I think this, and then I can go on, seek support when in need, demonstrates cultural awareness and sensitivity. So we were very happy to see that we are all on the same page of being a community where growth is, where we want to enable you to grow, right? But also I still want to go back to the personal responsibility because I think we often have had in all your times the conversation about discipline, about self-discipline, and how it's important to bring it with you and to have it with you and for it not to be just enabled by the code of conduct. And I wanted to ask you, like on your personal way of seeing things and how you experience things, what are your intrinsic motivators to be one way or another, and what is your understanding of this personal responsibility? And I know that knowing all of you, this is not about simply obeying the rules, it's much beyond that, right? So I want to, because I think that this is a question that probably matters a lot to parents as well. And I'm also curious to know. Zach, over to you.
Right. Well, so at least in terms of the discipline, I think something that's unique in a sense about UWC, even with its status as a boarding school, is that at least on a personal level, discipline for me never had anything to do with obedience to authority. Obviously, authority is there for a purpose, but at least in my experience, it was never really to try and cage me or anything. Of course, it was more about my well-being and safeguarding. And so in that sense, at least talking about the values and the personal responsibility. So a trait that I was quite glad to hear was about the ability to support when necessary, because my entire motivation for UWC at least was really to meet people from all over the world. I was quite clear about that, and so I had my priorities in order. So just one example being, going back to the discussion about personal responsibility, in my second year, one of my roommates had lost a family member, and that was obviously crippling for them at every level imaginable, whether it's emotional or even physical, just the physical toll of having to deal with that kind of emotional distress. And so obviously I had just met him a few months back, but it doesn't change the fact that as my roommate, and as a younger roommate at that, I almost felt like a brotherly responsibility to take care of that person, regardless of, I think it would be silly to try and say, well, he's my roommate, but you know, it's his life. And so he can take care of himself. Of course not. I mean, we're in one single space. And so privacy is also something which can be limited at UWC sometimes. And so if you can't extend privacy, you at least extend support. And so at least regarding everything we were talking about, discipline, I think it's a lot more about how you want to present yourself to the community, because authority is one thing, fine, you obey the rules, but at least for someone like me who knew that they wanted to make friendships as their top priority at UWC, I think discipline is also just proving that you can be relied on in times where it's going to be necessary and that you're trustworthy.
Thank you, Zach. Lucia.
Yes, so no, in a similar kind of vein to what Zach is saying, during my time at UWC, because we got there and there were like there were no rules, but there was a big emphasis on finding structures that weren't imposed on us, but that made school life the best it could be for everyone. There was a lot of conversation about like, do we need this rule? Do we need that rule? And I think the way I saw it, because people were arguing, for example, like class attendance. Why do I need to be in a class when maybe I'm not in the right mood for learning? What if I learn better in a different way? And I think the conclusion of those discussions was that self-discipline and discipline is useful, not from the perspective of like, you must be human that knows how to adhere to rules that were imposed to you, but they're a way of building community and they're a way of being there for each other. So you don't show up to a class because you have to, because you need to mold yourself into this kind of robot, but because the class is not just about listening, it's also about listening to you and to the other people that are there, to contribute to the conversation, etc. So I think my time in UWC really made me see discipline and personal responsibility less as a selfish thing and more as a way of being a good student. And then that can apply as well to your later life. Like, why do you need to pay taxes? Why do you need to do this? Why do you need to do that? Then to be part of a community. So if you take it that way, then discipline and rules just take an entire, like, just become something else.
Thank you, Lucy. It sounds like you're talking about citizenship, right? Being a citizen. So
and UWC is small.
Yeah, and where the country will want to have. Sashka, Zarin, do you want to add, or I have a question from a parent? Okay, I'll go ahead with the question. So a question, very helpful, thanks. Can someone talk about how important grades are for the student to move on into the next step in one slide after UWC division?
Yes,
Sashka, please.
I think for me, that was like, at least in my generation, and as Lucia mentioned, when we arrived there was a lot of experimenting going on about like what worked and what didn't. And I think grades were one of those things. Like some teachers would put like a strong emphasis on grades, and it was quite a like strict system, and with some subjects, whereas with others it was more of a flexible thing. And I think like eventually what I realized is that as much as they mattered, for me personally, it was more of a thing where grades became like an end goal that I would always work towards, and having this sort of reward system. So I would personally attach significance to of my work to whatever grade I got, and that sort of prevented me from actually enjoying the work that I did. Whereas with some subjects where I had more flexibility with things, I actually ended up getting better results eventually. Because I'm not saying grades don't matter and like do not look at them, but I think it's very important for, and going back to the personal responsibility topic, it's very important to somehow train ourselves to enjoy the process and not enjoy the rewards of the process. Because when we just focus on the rewards, we literally, like, every next effort is going to take double energy. So I think it's very important to somehow focus on the grades in the healthiest way and not and look at them as something that is sort of that we can utilize to reflect on our work, and not to assess how good of students we are, let's say, and not to look at them as something that defines us, but more like, how can I approach this in a different way, that sort of thing, like with the constructive feedback and etc.
Thank you, Sashka. Zach, Zach and then Zarin.
Yes, so at least in terms of the importance of grades, I think, again, it always goes back to the goal of what you want your UWC experience to be about. And so I'm quite shameless in the sense that I was very clear that I was at UWC to meet people. And so grades, obviously, I am a student and I have an obligation to keep up my education. That much I knew. But I was also aware that, at least in my case, as an example, was getting into a prestigious university and a scholarship a priority for me. Not necessarily. I was privileged in the sense that as a student of the IB, if, for example, I could score a 28 and get my diploma successfully, then at least in my home country in the Philippines, that would have automatically meant a slot in an honors program. And so on the one hand, you take into consideration what you want. Why would you want those good grades? I think one of the most dangerous things to do is to automatically assume, oh, I want good grades because it's good grades, but you don't really know what it is you want out of a 45. In some people's cases, for example, those who come from more economically deprived backgrounds, of course, if they're trying to get to a university in the next step and they anticipate financial hardship, then by all means encourage them to chase those sevens and to chase the 45. I think Dilijan has the facilities to promote that academic growth. But at the same time, if moving on from UWC, if your desired destination is not Harvard or Yale, and it need not be, I think that's something that needs to be emphasized. There are many options in the world. Then grades need not be the end all or be all. I think you get to determine a lot its significance to you, as long as, of course, you are passing, which is the ideal situation.
Thank you, Zach. Zarin?
Just adding on to what everything that has already been said, I think one of the academic aspects of UWC that I miss most, which is absent in my current college environment, or which was absent in my school in Bangladesh, is a healthy educational environment where people are really supportive of each other and are always trying to pull each other up. So, for example, an example would be when I was in Bangladesh, it was a very common practice after a test or after an exam to ask your peers how much they got. And it was just something that we did without even actually thinking about the repercussions of that, or if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But when I came to UWC, I obviously realized that probably wasn't such a healthy practice. And obviously all of us will refrain from doing that. But again, once I arrived in college, it was people wouldn't even think twice before asking what somebody's GPA is. And it kind of makes you realize that that is perhaps not the healthiest practice or not the healthiest attitude to have towards grades or competition in general. So yes, one of the things that I loved about UWC is that people always definitely had the thought of grades or maintaining a good score in their mind, but they did not let that get in the way of friendship or enjoying UWC or enjoying the UWC values and living by the UWC values to the fullest.
Thank you, Zarin. Unless Lucia, you want to add anything? Okay, I have one more question. Can you talk about challenges that one can have at UWC Dilijan and how they could hinder the progress and the journey, and maybe help the students to deal with that challenge? Any advice you could have? This is also a question from the audience. I think maybe like time management could be a challenge, right? The sleep, study, socialize, famous 3 S's. Yes, Lucia.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because as much as it is an incredible experience, like literally life-changing, and you never have, I mean, you have other great experiences afterwards, but nothing ever just quite like UWC, it is also very challenging. And I think it's not like a very tangible solution, but something that's important for students is to realize that it is a very intense environment. It is, you change countries, you're living away from your family, you're living with 200 whatever, 250, 300 people, you have no privacy. You've just made a lot of new friends, but at the end of the day, you're surrounded by people that you've just met. Everything feels very intense. So it's normal to feel overwhelmed by the academics, by the social life, by everything. And I think it's important to remind yourself that those 2 years are not the rest of your life. And it's important to try as many things as you can, to try focusing on different things at different times, but to also take time for yourself and realize that if something doesn't happen for you within those 2 years, it can happen afterwards. So yeah, I think it's important to remind yourselves that being overwhelmed is more of like the natural response to UWC experience than just not feeling anything and cruising through it.
Yes, Darin, thank you.
I think what I was about to say is connected to the previous question about grades, because I think it's really easy to, because obviously we are in a community, in the UWC community with absolutely brilliant and intelligent and talented individuals. So it's really easy to get lost in the spiral of constantly trying to achieve good grades or doing well academically. I know that sometimes I was lost in that spiral. For example, I remember missing one regional evening because I was studying for a chemistry test, but looking back on it, I know that that chemistry test is going to be a tiny blip or a tiny dot in my entire life. Whereas if I went to the regional evening, that would have probably been an amazing memory that I cherished forever. So just reflecting on that, I think it's really easy to get lost in that loop of constantly trying to do well academically. Whereas UWC is definitely about opening yourself up to new experiences, new cultures, and trying new and different things which you wouldn't have the opportunity to try if you were studying at a different school, perhaps. With all of that being said, it definitely gets difficult to strike a perfect balance, because I like when I was at the UWC, I always felt like there was always so much going on, and I did not know what to focus my energy on. So striking that balance can definitely be difficult, but as long as you have a clear purpose in terms of where you want your UWC experience to head, and as long as you're taking steps for that to happen, then I think you should be fine. So just trying to maintain a good balance between grades, extracurriculars, having an impact on the community, personal development. I know that it sounds like a lot, but I think it is possible because you're in a supportive environment.
Sashka, please. Thank you, Darin.
Yeah, I guess I'll just be adding to that same point that while looking for that balance, I think it's important not to forget that the key like resource of UWC, I think, is the people. Like what the sort of the difference between a fancy, really fully fledged kind of state-of-the-art school and UWC is the fact that it brings about like crazy mixture of cultures. I know I'm not going to go into more details about those cliche phrases that we know, but it really is a very unique environment. And I think when it comes to time management, when it comes to lack of privacy, and when it comes to all those things, I think as paradoxical as it is for me, the sort of escape was to find people that I resonated with in different ways. For instance, like studying in study groups with people that I knew were more productive than I was in certain ways, and they would sort of balance out my sort of lack of focus. Or for instance, I don't know, doing some artsy things with people that I knew were more into that specific stuff. So I think what was most important for me was understanding how much working together with all the different sort of like people with all the different interests or motivations, I think it was kind of the most sort of unique experience about it. And that's why it will never happen again, as Lucia mentioned, because after UWC, you live your own life, sort of, but there you live your own life that is very much shared in this tiny community that is, at that point, a whole world to you. So yeah, I think it's very important to not forget the people. Yeah.
Thank you, Zach.
Yes, and well, adding on to the flip side of that, so while of course people are by far the most powerful thing in the UWC community, I think adding on to what Sashka said, when you're living in that community, more or less, you're not living strictly your own life per se, because you're always surrounded by people. It doesn't matter whether you're going to your room or to a classroom. It can be very difficult, even on a very spacious campus like Diligence, to really find that sense of privacy. because when other people go looking for that privacy, they're probably in the same spaces where people would think to get away, probably sitting on a bench by the river or walking around. And so I think privacy would be one of the challenges, and the solution to that really being is that it's perfectly fine to set boundaries. The instinct that a lot of people have at Dilijan, thankfully, is to be caring and to ask if you're okay. And I think that's something that really is beautiful. But over 2 years, I think at least amongst my best friends and I, for example, we developed a language wherein if in a cafeteria, I was in the corner and I had my earphones in, that my friend sort of understood Zach's fine. He just wants to be on his own right now. I don't need to approach him and bother him and ask, oh, are you okay? That's just sort of an understanding that you develop over time. And so I think a few people going in might be a bit afraid to set boundaries. They think that, oh, I need to be fully one with the community. I need to really participate in everything. But over time, for the sake of self-preservation, I think setting boundaries is one of the best things you can do, especially also because if you are interacting in a way wherein there are no boundaries, then in a sense, you'll get exhausted even faster and interactions become less meaningful in that sense. And so you can't give what you don't have, and it's perfectly fine to try and take energy first before giving it out to other people.
Thank you, Zach. I think we could go on for another hour in this conversation, but we need to wrap up. And I want to ask you one question that probably parents also care about. How does UWC Dilijan experience prepared you, or was a bridge for you for your university, that like for your university life? How do you feel that you came to your next stage? What is different? What was different about you? How did it prepare you? Or maybe it didn't prepare you. Yes, Sashka.
I mean, there are several things, but like I'm going to focus more on the ones that resonate with me the most. So first, I think was in terms of very academic kind of aspects of university education, I was really prepared for my first year because with all the other students really struggling with the ESA structures and all those things, I think more prepared, as in like I had much more skill of working independently and having a diverse sort of educational experience. And in a more social, speaking about the social aspects a little more, I think what was very difficult for me in my first year at the university was finding people. And once I arrived in Edinburgh, I had like a huge UWC community there. And with most universities where our students get into, that's the case. And I'm not saying that it saves your life per se, but it's really a thing that makes you gives you a very unique sort of first year experience where you already have like a fully prepared kind of cohort of students waiting for you, and they have their own communities, their own clubs. They help you out with all those things that you might need in your first year. So yeah, that's a very big advantage, I would say.
Thank you. Zari?
This question reminds me of a conversation that I was having with Zach a while back. And because after I graduated, I think everybody goes through this almost stint of being really sad and depressed because like this incredible life-changing experience was coming to an end. So I was talking to Zach about it and I was asking him how he dealt with that. And especially because once I arrived in university, I realized that it's a much larger community with so many people who perhaps don't have the same values and ideals, which I valued for the last 2 years. And I was surrounded by all of these, by these 200 students who had the same values and had the same ideals that they wanted to lead their lives by. So all of a sudden I was in this massive school, in this massive college with people from a lot more diverse opinions. So I was talking to Zach about that. And one of the things that he said really resonated with me, and allow me to say this, Zach. So what he said is that obviously UWC prepared you for this because you were in this bubble sharing and talking about all of these same ideals and all these same values. But once you actually go to college, you realize that it's very powerful and almost liberating being this one unique individual with these values in a crowd of all of these other people with a lot of other different opinions, where you know that you can live your life by these values that others don't share. and you know that you really have an impact to make on the community by spreading these values and spreading these ideals. So I think that was a very important lesson for me. So thank you, Zach. And I think that's very important for anybody to remember who just freshly graduated from UWC and is moving on with their lives.
Thank you, Zareen. Lucia?
Yeah, so I'm going to try not to repeat what other people have said, even though I agree with everything. So I would say from an academic perspective, it's quite like the first years of university are quite easy just because the IB prepares you so well for like independent research, for time management, for all of that. So I actually found that it really prepared me really well. Then from like a work perspective, I think Gabrielle mentioned this earlier, but it really prepares you as well to work in multicultural settings. You have that like sensitivity that maybe other people that haven't been in multicultural environments don't have. So I think it also makes you a really good speaker, a communicator, and a really good team player in a way that stands out to like employers, to people in companies, etc. And from a social perspective, so it was quite a shock to leave UWC and to suddenly be surrounded by people that didn't care about the same things that I cared, and it can feel a bit lonely. And then you find the UWC community and you're like, oh, this is amazing, like I can make so many friends. But in my first years, I used to think that I could only be friends with people that had gone to UWC, which is not a good way of approaching social life, because then you kind of like look down on other people as well, until I realized that it wasn't that people had to have been to UWC for me to be able to make friends with them. Is that I wanted to surround myself with people that wanted to have a bigger purpose in life and that wanted to have a positive impact. And that has really helped me know what kind of people I want to surround myself by, what kind of clubs, volunteer organizations, workplaces I want to be in. So it kind of has given me like a very easy way of understanding if something is going to make me happy or not. So I think overall, sometimes having been to WC makes my life more complicated, but overall, I would say it's been like very positive.
Thank you, Lucia. I can't believe we're that old of a college that we have alums who are talking about work now, finally. Not just students. Sashka, over to you.
I think I answered this question already.
Oh, sorry. Yes, you did. Zach, I missed you, I think.
Yeah,
we're missing your
no worries. Well, Zaren got to talk a bit.
Yeah, she quoted you a lot. That's why
Yeah.
I felt like you've spoken.
Yeah, but no, well, I think just on the flip side, so and then of course joking, you said how it did prepare you or didn't prepare you. Just of course people will think in a negative way, oh, what did UWC not prepare you for in the real world? Well, I don't say this in a negative way at all, but I think something like what Zarin said, there is that hangover period, that sort of the nostalgic part where right after you leave, you want to cling so hard to it. You think that this is how the world should be. But I think if there are any audience members who are parents of second years, I think something which would have helped me a lot in viewing the perspective is that UWC is a very unique opportunity. And because of that unique opportunity, there is definitely that gap in between where UWC is and where the rest of the world is at. And so had I managed to calibrate my expectations as such going into college, I think it would have been easier. Of course, there are those who would say, but we can't live in a world of polarization. We shouldn't have. I've heard people say, nationality shouldn't be an important factor in the way you interact. But I think it's in moments like that where you can draw strength from the fact that you've had the chance to see what the world could be like. And so if indeed you really did cherish UWC that much, then you need to work within the world that we have now and try to really push it in that direction if those are your values. Because an irony which was pointed out to me very early on in my experience in UWC was that UWC is meant to teach tolerance. It's meant to teach all of these common values. But at the same time, you wouldn't be at UWC unless you already believe that. I mean, I don't think any national committee is admitting somebody who is racist to the program, hoping to convert them over time. And so I think more than anything, going into UWC and leaving UWC, recognize that it is unique and it's something to be grateful for in the 2 years. After those 2 years, you'll see that the world is a little bit different, but it gives you the chance to be an idealist without illusions. You get to hold on to the values, but also know that there's a lot of work still to be done. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I think this is a beautiful closing statement to our conversation. Thank you guys so much for joining and for once again inspiring me at least. And yes, it's fascinating to hear you speak about, and just want to wish you all the best in your journeys, in your life journeys, and in your educational journeys, in your human journeys, and to always carry with you this pragmatic idealism, what Zach was talking about. And I want to hand over to Gabriel. Yeah, and thank you. I tried my best to guide this conversation. It wasn't easy, but it was really nice to hear you talk, and looking forward to continuation. Thank you. Gabriel, over to you.
And thanks to you, Elena. I think that you all see with the caliber of our graduates why it is a pleasure to work with such talented young people. We need people like this if we want to change the world into the world we need. You've given us a lot to think about, and I think that some of the adults may have thought, actually, I wish I were that mature. I wish I were that reflective. I wish I thought of those things at my point in life, at the same age. UWC Values is not just something to talk about. It's something to walk the walk, to incarnate them, to do something with them. And that doesn't mean that it's easy. We've heard from our alumni how sometimes you get yourself into trouble by being valued, by being principled. I think we can thank you once again, and let's all work together to make the world a better place, because that's what we need. Thank you, your audience, for connecting. Thank you much for your time. Thank you all, and I hope our paths will cross very soon. Bye-bye.